Hi, welcome to the Introstat lecture series, and we are in the unit Sample Survey. So this is our lecture number 10, and this is the third videos for this lecture. And so for the previous two videos, the first video we talk about the three big ideas about sampling. And the second video, we talk about the different sampling methods here, right? We talk about the simple random sample, stratified sample, cluster sample, systematic sample, those things. And so for the third video, we're going to talk about what is the common sampling mistakes, and we should avoid and when we designed our samples here. And then we also take a look at some examples there. All right, so let's go ahead, go back to our lecture note here. All right, so from this lecture note, if you kind of refresh your memory, that's what we talk about in the second video, talk about the different samples here. So now let's take a look at what are the few common sample mistakes we're going to have. We need to watch out and be careful. So when we take samples, we don't make those mistakes. So the first ones here is we call it when you sample and you are taking the volunteers. And this is kind of easy because you say, hey, the volunteer, then, you will be able to, instead of you go out to search, check for the people kind of volunteer for doing your samples here. So the response we get from the volunteers, we call it a voluntary response sample. So for the voluntary response samples here, we need to be very careful. This type of a sample we say is almost always be biased. Okay, remember the bias, the bias is one of the things we kind of say that's the big no-nos, right? So we always be biased, and we should should be avoid and distrusted. Okay, think about it. If somebody volunteer for doing a sample, that means very possible this person have a passion about whatever the things you try to survey, or this person have a very strong opinion about what the things you need to survey. So for the sample volunteer, so voluntary response sample almost is always biased. So right, because that's why we need to be very careful and always biased, and some we should try to avoid. Even this probably is a very cheap sampling plan and also very convenient. So but because of the volunteer, so we inherit some bias in our response, so we need to be very careful. Okay, so then the next one we call this a sample conveniently. So the response we call it a convenience sample. Convenience sample also, this type of the sample are, convenience samples here are likely to be flawed. Or for similar reason. For similar reasons here. As the voluntary response sample. So for the convenience sample, so if you want to ask a school district's parents about a certain policy, and so then what do we mean a convenience sample? So so during the maybe the teacher parents night, and you just stand at the front door and ask for the parents to say what their opinion about the certain policies here. This is what we call it a convenience sample, because so what the type of the bias and we can inherit here. So that means you did not cover the whole population, right? So for the parents, they come to the teacher-parents conference. So maybe they care about their kids, and maybe they have involved more to the schools, right? So when you get the sample about just the stand at the front door and ask for the parents about their opinion. So this type of the samplings here, you not cover the whole population, and the opinions here could be flawed. All right, and the bias, just like we talk about the volunteer samples here. Okay, then the next one here we said using a bad sampling frame here. So the bad sampling frame can lead to the samples. So this one can lead to the samples that do not represent the population of interest. Okay, so that's why we use the same examples. We said if you want to create a, you have a, for certain city, they have some land, so they were thinking about either put a dog park, a library, or like maybe just a general park for the general publics here. So depends on where you ask citizens' opinions, right? So if you go to some like the park and you ask the dog, you ask the people that were playing with dog there, you ask them, then maybe they will say, hey, I want a dog park, right? And so that depend on where you take a sample. So if your sample frame is not cover the whole population, right? So your response could be biased also. That's why we said a better sampling plan basically is you not to represent the population of interest. Okay, so we need to get the the everybody inside the population have a chance to express their interest here. Okay, so the undercoverages here. Okay, so that's exactly it's a very similar like what we call the bad sampling friends here. So this ones occurs, okay, when the individual is from a subgroup of the population are selected less often than they should be. Okay, so that's what we call it, the undercoverages here. So for example, if, for cities, right? So if the certain population, for example, we have the different races in cities. So like, for example, you have like maybe 19% of Hispanic and 10% of Asians and then maybe like 15% of the African American. So when you choose for example, right? So when you choose the samples here, your sample should come, should be similar percentage of your population. So if your sample, like for example, for the jury selections here, so if all your juries, for the past maybe 5 years, if you take a look at the jury selections, then if a certain race is always underrepresented here, so then you will wonder why it's here, right? So if the Hispanic is 19% of the population, but if you take a look for the past 5 years, the jury selection, the Hispanic, if the percentage is only be 12%, then you will wonder why is like not represent true population proportion for the Hispanic group. It's because my sampling method has the problems, or it's because of response have the problems here. So that's why we call this the undercoverage. So you will need to make sure my sampling methods here is covered all the subgroups equally, right? So that's why we said it's undercoverage problems here. Then the next one here is we call this a non-response bias. This one is also is a very, is very interesting, can play a big role for your survey result. So this one's here is can arise here, can arise when the sampled individual, when the sampled individual will not or cannot respond, right? So that's what we call the non-response bias. It doesn't mean they don't care. Sometimes they don't want to answer is because they feel embarrassed about the things, or they don't want the people to know their opinions about the things. That doesn't mean that they don't care here. So for those non-response biases here, sometimes they will affect your survey results here. So that's why if we have a large non-response, from the survey, you might want to understand, why maybe the way you address the question is not right. People do not want to answer that. Or you ask some personal questions and people do not want to answer the personal questions here. So we need to understand what is the non-response bias can affect our survey results here. Okay, so in here, the response bias is here. So even the people answer doesn't mean, they answer correct, they answer, the without the biases here, right? So this is could happen, this could arise when the people responds, right? When the respondents answer. When the response to answer might be affected by external influence. Okay, so for example, if you are working for companies, right? So like if the HR get you, get you guys, get the people together, ask their opinion about how they feel about their bosses here, right? So in here, you respond, right? So you say, oh, I love my boss, and oh, my boss is a good person, but in here, this type of the bias could be was influenced by the external influence. So because you don't want to tell the truth because there's an HR layer, right? Human resource person's there, you're afraid the human resource person will tell your boss about your opinion to the boss. Then later, might influence your raise, those things. So that's what we call it. Even you respond, then we need to be careful, is this response was influenced by some external factors, and this is a real opinions here. So that's what we call it is the response bias here. All right. So those are the 6 very typical common mistakes we could make when we do the sampling methods here. So we need to be very careful about it. Okay, so now we have, talk about the different sampling methods here and different possible mistakes we're going to make, right? So, and what type of the mistake we have, and so we need to be careful. And so when we try to analyze the results here, let's take a look at some scenarios here, all right? So the example number 1 here. So let's say, in a large city school system with 42 elementary schools, the school board is consider the adoption of new policies that would require elementary students to pass a test in order to be promoted to the next grade. All right. And so, the PTA wants to find out whether parents agree with this plan. Listed below are some of the idea proposed of gathering data during the surveys here. For each indicator, what kind of sampling strategy and what could be the bias in the results here. Okay, so the first method here, so the PTA what to do is they will ask the parents for their opinion when they visit the PTA booth during the parent-teacher conference. Which kind of sampling is strategy is here. Okay, so the PTA said, they will just, they will ask the parents' opinion when they come to visit the PTA booth during the, during the teacher parents conference. So this sampling strategy is what? This is a convenience sampling, right? So it's not a cluster and it's not a simple random sample. I did not a random sample. I'm waiting for people just stop by and ask for that. All right. So it's not a stratify. I did not find the homogeneous subgroup and then go to sampling here. So what kind of a bias is this one could covers here? Remembers, right? So this is a convenience samples, right? So it possible is okay, so it will be the under coverage and because they stop by, it doesn't mean every parents will stop by here, right? So here it will be an under coverage bias could result since the parents in the sample may not be representative of all the parents here. Okay, so now the part A, why is part A is not true? They said under coverage bias could result for only parents involved with the PTA will be sample. This is not true. Parents stop at the PTA booth doesn't mean the parents involved, right? So this is not true. Then part B is here, there's a volunteer response bias. This is not a volunteer. They did not volunteer to give you the opinion. They come to visit, you ask them, see here, all right? And so then the part C is here, they said response bias. Response bias could result since PTA wants the parent. No, we did not know PTA support or against. That's why the PTA, so from the problem statement, we do not know, right? So we don't know PTA's support against that. So this one's here will be part D because, the parents stop at the booth, PTA ask them. So this is under coverage issues, right? Okay, so now let's take a look at the second method. Then somebody say, okay, and so let's say, let's put a big ad in the newspaper, then ask people to log their opinion on the PTA website. What kind of sampling strategy is involved? So for these ones here, the PTA just put a big ad in the newspaper and then ask parents to log on. So this sampling is, we call it is what is voluntary sampling, right? So they just say here, hey, go to log on to PTA. So people, some people they don't do it, some people they do it. So this is what we call the volunteer. And then this is not the convenience here. It's because it's not say you kind of sampling and so this is more like the people is volunteer to do that. This is definitely is not a stratifying. This is not like a cluster. So because of the volunteers, so what type of the bias here? Because the people, they probably will log on into the PTA website to give their opinion. Maybe they have a strong opinion about the policies here. So that's why we said that there could be the problem is the volunteer response bias will result since parents who feel strongly, probably they will respond, right? And so let's take a look at what is part A is not right. They said under coverage bias could result since only parents involved with the PTA will be, will be sample. No, it's not. They send out to everybody's here. Bias could result only if a sampling strategy is not followed. No, okay. Response bias could result since PTA want the parents. We don't know PTA want the parents. They just say, hey, go to log on to the PTA website now, put your opinions here. Okay, let's take a look at number Okay, number 3 is here. The method number 3, let's say, hey, I'm a randomly select 250 parents and send them a survey. Follow up with a home visit if they do not return their survey within a week. What kind of sampling strategy is this one? Okay, so this one's here, this is what we call this simple random sample, right? So randomly select 250 parents in the whole schools, right? Then they give them the survey. If they don't answer, then they will physically go to visit and to get the, to get the answers here. So what kind of the bias could result? Okay, so for here, the bias can only result if the sampling strategy is not followed as described. What I mean, so you send out the 250 survey, right? So if I only have 200 parents respond, then the 50 of the parents, they don't respond. If I don't follow up to go to their home, do a home visit to get their opinion, then I'm going to miss this 50 people's opinion. That could be the bias, right? So maybe either they don't support the policy, I don't want to respond, or they don't care about the policy. So that's why this is a pretty good random sample, right? So, but if you don't follow up, then it will become the more like a volunteer samples, right? So it's not a totally voluntary sample, it's a kind of become non-response error. So they don't respond and you don't know why they don't respond, right? So that's why the bias could result only if the sampling strategy is not followed. And so in here we say the voluntary response biased. It's similar like that, but it's not really, it's like they don't respond. Then I'm going to follow up with that. And let's say the response bias could result cis PTA. So that's same things. The PTA do not say they like or dislike. Under coverage is here. So this is not under coverage because I'm randomly pick 250 parents. So it is a random sample. So it's covered the whole population, represented the whole population, all the parents in the school. Okay. So the number 4 is here. So they say, okay, forget about that. Let's do this way. So they send a survey home with every student and ask parents to fill it out and return into the week within a week. What kind of sampling is this one? So let's say every student get a survey, take the survey homes, right? So this kind of is more like what? It's more like a census. We know the census, that means you check everybody in the population here, right? Then you take it. And so what type of the bias it could happens here because you let the student take the survey homes, right? So it could be is the non-response bias. So not all the parents will respond. There are could be couple reasons. First, student never give the survey to their parents. So their parents don't even know there's a survey going on. And the parents too busy, maybe they care, but they're too busy, they do not respond. Or parents don't care, right? So they don't respond. So you send a survey home. So maybe you will only get 20% return. So we have 80% non-response bias here. So that's what we call is a non-response bias. Okay, so then the A is here, we say bias could result if a sampling strategy is not followed. So in here, we really don't even have a sampling strategy. We do sensors here, we do everybody. And then the part B is here is the voluntary response bias will result since only parents who feel strongly about the issue will respond. This part possible be a partially true, right? So for the voluntary response, so for the parents, if they are care, maybe they will respond. But also the main bias could be is a non-response bias. Is because I don't even know, like its parents not respond is what the reasons, right? So maybe they care, maybe they have a strong passion, but they just forget about that, and or the student did not even bring the survey home, right? Parents don't even know there's a survey here. So the part D is the same things here is the response bias. Because PTA, we don't know the PTA is like the policy or against the policy here. All right. Okay, so those are the kind of some of the different scenarios about a sample survey. As you can see, you know, when you want to get a certain data, right, you have a different way to take your samples here. So remember, right here, be very careful here, right? So you want to try to avoid, you know, the common sampling mistake, special voluntary, like the response, non-response bias, all this could result your survey result, and based on your survey result, when you try to predict, it's not correct, it's not accurate. All right, that's it, okay? So the last will be this lectures here about the sample survey. Like we said at the beginning, sampling method is a big area in the statistic area, and we just kind of get a sketch the, you know, we kind of scratch the surface a little bit, get a little bit of taste about what is the sampling methods here. All right, okay, so nice talk to you, and we'll talk to you in the next, you know, in our next topics here. Okay, bye. Have a good day.